Dr. Fuller comes to us as a distinguished professor of education, founder and director of the Institute for Transformation of Learning at Marquette University in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. The mission of the Institute is to support exemplary education options that transform learning for children while empowering families, particularly low-income families, to choose the best options for their children. Dr. Fuller has enjoyed a long and commendable career in public service and higher education. Before his appointment at Marquette, Dr. Fuller served as a superintendent of Milwaukee Public Schools from 1991 to 1995. He was then a senior fellow at the Annenberg Institute for School Reform at Brown University from 1995 to 1997. He serves on the boards of numerous institutions, including the Black Alliance for Educational Opportunities, which he helped to found in 1999. The mission of the Black Alliance for Educational Options is to increase access to high-quality education options for black children by actively supporting transformational education reform initiatives and parental choice policies that empower low-income and working-class black families. Those familiar with Dr. Fuller's work will certainly hear his voice in those words, and we're fortunate to hear more from him here today. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Howard Fuller.
I really do appreciate this opportunity to be with you all this morning, and I really enjoyed what Jeff had to say, and it got me fired up. So what I'm going to try to do is to speak on this theme of reframe, reignite, and reimagine in a very brief way that will hopefully help us with the questions that will come in this session and maybe in some of the others as well. There's a frame that guides everything that I do in the fight today to radically reform education in this country. I look through a prism that began with the introduction of African people into this country as indentured servants and later on as slaves. And when the decision was made to enslave us, the fight for freedom took on a new sense of urgency. It was ultimately a fight to be recognized first as human beings and ultimately as full citizens in our new world. Lerone Bennett, in his book, The Shaping of Black America, described our situation in this way. Beyond a doubt, blacks wanted freedom and fought for freedom, but they were powerless, and their adversaries held all of the high ground. For them and for millions who would follow, this was one of history's hard places. There was no immediate possibility of escape. There was no immediate possibility of triumph. And there was nothing in the world that they could do about it, except to play the cards that history had dealt them, waiting, watching, and taking every advantage of every opportunity to extend the lines of hope and organization. And for me, education reform in this country today is the latest extension of the line of hope for my people. Ed reform for me is a means, not an end. I am in education reform because I believe that education is one of the levers that give people the possibility of exercising freedom. The end game is to give our children the means that will enable them to engage in the process to transform their world. It's what Paulo Freire called the practice of freedom. Let me state the point in a different way. I would suggest that the ability of a person to be free in its truest sense in this country is dependent to a large degree upon his or her being able to attain a point of relative economic independence. Relative economic independence is impossible without a source of income. And in most instances, A decent job is impossible without an education. I'm very clear that the mission of education is so much more than preparing our young people for a job, but being able to be an effective participant in the economic life of a society is certainly a critical ingredient to people being able to ultimately be socially productive citizens. And in truth, I don't need to be reignited because, I'm just saying, because the flame of frustration and anger that is stoked by the fact that we have ninth graders coming to our school who cannot read. And so that flame will never go out. This is America. How does this happen? How did it happen that on February 1st, 1960, 4 black students from A&T sat down at a lunch counter and demanded to be served? And here we are in 2014, black students sit down at a lunch counter where they're welcome and can't read the menu. How did that happen in America? And so this flame burns in my heart and in my soul because I know that the battle for education reform in many quarters is not about what is best for our children. It's not about standards. It's not about curriculum. It's not about test scores. It's not about how many years TFA cohorts will stay in the classroom. It's not about that. It is about power. It is about who controls the flow and the distribution of the money. Who controls the jobs? Who controls the contracts for building facilities? Who controls the contracts for textbooks? Who controls the contracts for all these research projects that all of you scholarly people do? So when I reimagine, Pastor McCullough, what it takes to make American education truly a beacon of freedom for our poorest children, I start with a number of different assumptions or beliefs about the current reality of the pathways to real change. And one of them is that the most powerful innovations in education must occur in classrooms between teachers and children. And to create the conditions that foster these innovations, we need to replace our current one best system with a system of learning opportunities based on a totally different governance and finance system. This new system should truly empower parents, allow dollars to follow students, hold adults accountable for student achievement, and alter the power arrangements that are the foundation for our current system. And in order to create this new system, we have to pursue a 3-sector strategy with a clear focus on creating great schools across the sectors and ensuring that low-income and working-class people are empowered to access these quality schools across the sectors. And by 3-sector, I mean the traditional public schools, charter schools, and private schools. And I emphasize the point of ensuring that low-income and working-class people are given the means, the power to choose, which means government support, because without that support, they will not be able to access the private sector. The reality is poor people in this country stand in a very different relational position to the educational institutions than those of us with money. Because with those of us with money, when traditional public schools do not work for our children, we're going to move to communities where they do work, or we're going to put our kids in private schools, or we're going to find the most expensive tutorial service that we can find, or we're going to do all three. And when I come to a lot of these conferences and stuff, man, like all I see a lot of hypocrites. Because a lot of y'all, oh no, I can't be for vouchers or opportunity scholarships. I can't be for that. But then when I ask you, where do y'all put your children? When you start talking to these teachers out here who would never put their children in schools that they teach in, but are demanding that poor people stay in these schools so they can get paid to put their kids in private schools. Yeah, I said it. And so, as I sit down, the quest to extend the lines of hope remain uppermost in my mind. And in the words of Amon Hotep, a great Egyptian sage, he said, and it's what continues my thoughts about the role of education and freedom. He said, our first mistake was that we thought of freedom as a place rather than as a continuation of struggle. Our second mistake was we thought of freedom as a goal rather than as a launching pad from which to reach our goals. And our third mistake was we thought that freedom actually made us free. Freedom is being shackled to identity, to purpose and direction, and being in constant pursuit. And it is that constant pursuit that gets me up every day to fight for our poorest children. And for me, today, education reform is an important battleground in that fight. We can reframe, we can reignite, and we can reimagine all we want. But if when we get through doing all of that, if poor children are in the same place they are in today, then all of this is bull. It's bull. Because our children are suffering. Our children are suffering. We don't need sympathy. We need real change. We need change that will make a difference. And so if you're going to reframe, if you're going to reimagine, and if you need to be reignited, then get reignited around creating the possibility of true freedom for our children. Thank you very much.